We look at day 3 of the government shutdown, and there is still no sign of a resolution as Republicans and Democrats continue to trade accusations as to who is to blame. Votes on a funding bill are scheduled to resume in the Senate this afternoon following a break yesterday. But if those votes fail again, no votes are expected over the weekend, which would extend the shutdown at least until Monday. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said Democrats will have another chance today to vote to reopen the government and that negotiations with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer are not going to accomplish a lot.
I think what, government agencies ought to be doing is the job and the work, and that's what I try to stay focused on. There is a blame game that goes on every time there's a government shutdown. I don't think that's constructive. I don't think it's about who wins and who loses. I think the people that lose in this are the American people, and probably most specifically federal workers. So I'm all about getting it back open again. I think shutdowns are nobody wins, and I think honestly, for the most part, they're stupid. We really shouldn't be shutting the government down, and it shouldn't be taken hostage to do other policy things that are totally unrelated to funding the government.
Okay, so let's talk about policy. Thune also defended the Trump administration's plans for a permanent federal layoffs due to the shutdown, as well as revoking billions in federal funding for projects in blue states. He said none of those things would happen if Democrats helped reopen the government and warned Democrats are, quote, playing with fire. Schumer responded yesterday, suggesting Americans were turning against Republicans, writing in part, Americans blame Trump and Republicans for the shutdown, and the longer they drag it out, the deeper the pain and that blame will grow. Ali Vitale, it didn't stop Taylor Swift from dropping an album, I take it. That's why you're happy today. Yeah. But I do want to ask about this blame game, because I see messaging that is extremely loud and effective from Republicans, and in many cases not true. How does this come down to policy? How do Democrats play that messaging game with the truth if these lies are out there? And secondly, this is the Republican bill. I mean, maybe at this point, in order to prevent people from being fired, the Democrats, what are their options at this point?
Those are all the considerations. And I can tell you, listening to The Life of a Showgirl is very different than covering the show that we are seeing on Capitol Hill, because Leader Thune is actually right. There is nothing good about a government shutdown, and using it as a consistent leverage point only underscores people's lack of faith in our governing institutions, especially Congress. But let me just chart for you the way that this is going to go, because I think it actually says a lot about where we are in the process. So the Senate's going to come back in town today. They're going to do another round of votes on this clean continuing resolution, which is the Republican plan, as well as the Democratic continuing resolution, which includes their health care priorities. Both are going to fail. Then they're going to leave town for the weekend. Everyone kind of comes back to town Monday afternoon, and they try again. It's not clear that the weekend is going to let any steam out of the pot. In fact, I think there are some moderate Democrats who are just going harder at a press for a bipartisan deal on something like Affordable Care Act subsidies, which you ask about the policy considerations here, Mika. There are many Democrats, including Senator Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire, who's a moderate Democrat. She's retiring. She went directly on Fox News yesterday morning, speaking on the president's favorite news network about the benefits of doing a deal on the Affordable Care Act for people who have backed Trump and Republicans, most recently in the 2024 election. Millions of Americans who are in Trump states, who are in Trump districts, would benefit from this kind of a deal because it would prevent their premiums from spiking early next year with their health care costs. Of course, that's true for Democratic voters, too, and it really shouldn't be a consideration. But the politics of this is so intertwined with the policy that her going on that network and making that pitch only shows the way that moderate Democrats are digging in on this strategy, hoping that there can be some kind of a deal. Whether or not that's the off-ramp, I guess we're going to continue to see. I think the way we've seen the Trump administration, Republicans like Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, pulling out funding for projects in New York or energy projects that are in states that Kamala Harris happened to win in 2024. That kind of pressure campaign is pretty unprecedented. The way that we've seen agencies communicating about this shutdown shutdown likely violates some rules about partisan speech through taxpayer-funded entities. But I think the concern with that kind of pressure campaign, even though it works for the MAGA base, doesn't exactly help Republicans bring Democrats to the negotiating table, which may be the off-ramp that we need here.
Right.
David Drucker, we've heard Speaker Johnson say a couple of times this week, there's nothing to negotiate here. Not only are we not negotiating, I don't see anything to talk about. And he's there, kind of appears, Republicans, John Thune, the president, of course, obviously, and his team, happy to watch Democrats flounder a little bit here. So what breaks this fever, if anything? Is there anything to talk about? Is anyone talking?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. But look, Willie, we have a playbook to look back on. We know how this stuff goes, right? Any time one party instigates the shutdown, the party with more votes just sits around and says, "This is what you caused, and we're not going to play your game." And we're content to sit here unless the polling changes, and the polling never does change, and wait until you come to your senses, right? I mean, I remember, 12 years ago now? 12 years ago this fall, we were, I don't know, this day 4 maybe of the Obamacare shutdown. And President Obama was like, this is ridiculous. We're not going to let you hold government spending hostage and negotiate so that it proves that this tactic works. And Democrats waited, and they waited patiently, and they waited, and they waited. And finally, House Republicans who caused this thing, they caved. And I think Republicans, looking at the playbook that has worked so well against them so many times, are content to sit there and just wait until Democrats finally throw their hands up in the air and cave. And let's recall, even though there are policy disagreements and debates going on, what shutdowns quickly become about is power. I have more votes than you, even if I sort of need your votes, and I'm not going to bend the knee to your minority votes because otherwise it's going to make me look weak. And right now, where Democrats are is that I think their party and their base and their activist base, and a lot of Democrats who are understandably upset with how President Trump is doing things, they want this fight. They always wanted this fight, whether it was about Obamacare subsidies or not. And they haven't given up on having the fight, and that's sort of the conflict that the Democrats find themselves in internally.
And you hear Republicans saying we can't let the opposing party use a government shutdown as leverage for their policy priorities. So let's talk